We'll move into the regular program now. I have to say at the outset that one of our speakers is tied up in traffic this morning due to the visit of another international dignitary, the Chinese Premier. So I'm going to introduce both of the panelists briefly so that if the second person can come, he'll join us on stage. But let me start now with our first panelist, Christopher Jones. Mr. Jones is a British national and joined the European Commission staff in 1985. He joined the European Commission's Directorate General in Energy in 1997 as the head of unit for electricity and gas. He took the role of Director for New and Renewable Sources of Energy in November 2008, going back in his career a bit, where he was responsible for the implementation of Renewable Energy Directive and the design, conception, and negotiation of labeling and energy efficiency standards. He subsequently became head of the Cabinet of Energy Commissioners, where he was responsible for general coordination of development of policy, and notably the conception and implementation of the Agenda for Change. In 2014, he was appointed to his present position with responsibility for coordination across several directorates. Christopher is also the author of the book Energy EU Law and the Internal Energy Market, published in 2006, and has several other titles to his credit. Hopefully joining us shortly will be Jay Khosla, who is the Assistant Deputy Minister, Energy Sector and Natural Resources Canada. Jay joined NRCan in 2009 and assumed his current role as ADM Energy Sector in July 2013. He's privileged to lead the stewardship of NRCan's energy sector in advancing Canada's international and domestic policy agenda. In this role, he actively promotes the responsible development of Canada's vast resources by collaborating with international, subnational, Aboriginal, industry, non-governmental, and intergovernmental partners and agencies. He holds a bachelor's degree in public administration from Dalhousie in Nova Scotia, as well as a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Ottawa. So we're hopeful that Jay will be able to get through traffic and join us shortly. I'll now join Christopher and we'll start our conversation. Are we on likewise? Very good. Is yours working as well, Christopher?
Hello.
Yes, you're working. Very good. Everyone knows the theme of this session, energy policy in Canada and the EU, differences, similarities, and common interests. And I think the Ambassador's remarks this morning revealed many areas where we overlap, and there'll also be some differentiation as well as the discussion goes on. Christopher and Jay had a chance to talk yesterday, and I gather that they made some plans for remarks this morning. I'd like to start, first of all, with Christopher's remarks. Hopefully Jane will join us in progress. And then please do be ready with a question or two after their commentary by our panelists. We'll be finishing this session just around 10:50, so that'll give you a notice of timeline going forward. Christopher, welcome to Canada, and we look forward to your remarks.
Well, thank you, Graham. As Graham mentioned, we had a EU-Canada energy dialogue yesterday, and it becomes very clear that there are enormous similarities in the challenges between the European Union and Canada in terms of energy. And what I'd like to do this morning in introductory remarks is just to explain a whistle-stop tour of European energy policy. And then I think it becomes clear that the challenges that we're facing and the policies that we have been doing over the last 10 years are very, very relevant to what Canada will be looking at over the next 10 years. But in order to understand European energy policy, you have to understand one thing, and that is the European Union is not blessed with natural resources as Canada is. We are blessed with a lack of resources. We import about 70%, somewhere around that, of our gas, about 70% of our oil, and these numbers are only going to get worse from the European Union's point of view, because our indigenous oil and our indigenous gas production will be falling off a cliff over the next 10 years. Now, of course, when I say these things are going to get worse for the European Union, that means they get better for Canada, because you're an actual supplier, and you are a potential supplier to the European Union. So the common interest there is evident, and I think it become more evident as I explain to you the reasons why we look also to diversify our suppliers, particularly of gas. In order to understand European energy policy, you also have to go back to the year about 2000 to 2004, because in that period, first of all, the European Union got climate change. It was really a clear period between 2000 and 2006 that the European Union went from a position of, in some member states, questions, ambivalence, to a position in 2006 that really everybody accepted climate change is one of the greatest challenges or the greatest fears we must have for our grandchildren. It is man-made, etc., etc. And pretty much you'll not find anybody in Europe who will disagree with this at the political or even citizen level. The other thing is we had an energy security challenge. The terminology that is probably the most elegant that I can use is that we were faced with a supplier that had a monopoly position in many member states and a very strong position for the rest of Europe that did not in the past always view the supply of gas to the European Union as a purely commercial issue. So when we have 25% of our gas supplies from Gazprom, and in 6 or 7 countries they have 100% of their supplies, and there were tensions between Russia and Ukraine leading to cuts of gas to the European Union, this was a real concern for 2 reasons, of course. First of all, if you don't have any energy, that's the most expensive sort of energy you can possibly have. And secondly, if you have a monopoly supplier in 5 or 6 countries, monopoly suppliers tend to price in a monopoly sort of way. It's not rocket science. And the third is that our electricity and gas prices were too high. We had, each member state was a separate little energy island, there was no trade, and there was no real competition. So as a result of that in 2000, we led to 2006, we had an EU energy policy, which was adopted by the heads of state. And this EU energy policy, the threads of it continue today. They're not that really much changed. And they're based very similar to those that you mentioned are the basis for an international energy policy. We call it a triangle of energy policy, that any intelligent energy policy, whatever you do, should try and hit 3 points of that triangle: sustainability, competitiveness, and security. Everything you do should try and be in that triangle, and the totality of your energy policy should form the correct balance between those 3 goals. So what was the key deliverable that we decided in 2006? That's what we call the 20-20-20 strategy that the ambassador referred to earlier. We said in 2006, by 2020, we will cut our CO2 emissions by 20% compared to 1990. By 2020, we will make sure that 20% of our total energy supply came from renewables. And by 2020, we would improve our energy efficiency by 20% compared to 1990, which means, more or less, we would be using 13% less energy in total in 2020 than we were using in 1990. Now, let me look at these in a little more detail, because I think they illustrate some of the challenges that Canada will be facing over the next decade or so. Let's try and unpick 20% renewables, renewable energy, not renewable electricity, renewable energy. Okay? Now, where can you get your renewables? You can get your renewables in electricity, you can get your renewables in transport, you can get your renewables in industry, and you can get renewables in heating and cooling of buildings. Now, it was decided at that time that electricity would have to do the heavy lifting, because that's where you can push renewables most quickly, certainly in 2006 and 2009. So it was decided that each member state would have a legally binding target for renewable. So for each member state, every member state had a legally binding target that would meet up to that 20% of the total energy supply. And when I say legally binding target, it means that if they do not achieve it, they will be taken to the Court of Justice, and eventually they may be fined. So this is serious, okay? Now, let's think what 20% means, okay? In 2008, 2009, 8.5% of our electricity came from renewable sources. 7% of that 8.5% was large hydro. So we have to go from 8.5% to at least 20%. Okay? The difference of that is 11%, 11.5%. So what it meant in reality is every year between 2010 and 2020, the European Union committed to install the same amount of PV and wind as it had done in the totality of the past. Now that is toe-curlingly ambitious. I think one can all agree. Now the EU is very much on target to meet this. We will meet this in 2020. And that's an extraordinary achievement. It has not been a simple road. It is not a simple road. It has led to a number of real challenges. It has led to a series of subsidies which has increased the price of electricity for citizens. Let's be honest about it. It has led to